Welcome to Tomorrow Today, where we take an inside look at how weather is impacting organizations around the world and the unique ways they're combating the impact. Brought to you by Tomorrow.io, the world's leading weather intelligence and climate adaptation platform. Hi, everyone. Hi, Thomas. Super glad you
Hey,
could be here today. My name is Ruth Vella, AI marketing specialist at Tomorrow.io. Today's conversation is all about innovating solutions, how public and private collaboration can address severe weather issues and hazards. Today, I'm joined by Thomas Cavett, VP of Government Affairs at Tomorrow.io. Thomas, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role here?
Sure. Thanks, Ruth. So I'm Thomas Cavett. I'm, as Ruth said, the VP of Government Affairs. Been here at the company about 2.5 years. So for us, that's a pretty long time, I guess. My background is I was in the Army, and then after business school, I've been in kind of the startup and consulting world for a few years. So right now, I focus a lot on public policy related to weather, space, and climate, and issues that sort of we care about as a company. And then I also do a lot of work on the business development side with governments.
Love it. Thanks so much. So today, Thomas and I will be chatting about how public and private entities can and are collaborating to innovate solutions for high impact and severe weather events and adapting to the climate changes and creating some resilience in their organizations. We know this is a really important issue as we continue to see increased weather volatility across the world. Thomas, to kick us off, can we start off a little bit broad? I'm really curious. What are your thoughts on how public and private sectors partner to tackle complex weather related challenges today?
Yeah. So, I mean, starting really broadly, when you think about sort of the history of the industry, right? Historically, governments have really been the main kind of funders of all of the infrastructure behind the weather industry. So, whether that's observation systems like ground radars or big billion-dollar spacecraft, satellites in space that are observing our atmosphere, historically, governments were the only ones that could afford that kind of infrastructure, right? But the technology has evolved quite a bit in the last decade or so to where private companies are starting to be able to really innovate on different pieces of those systems, from the observation systems to the way that models are run and to the products themselves that sort of are how we deliver forecast information to an end user. So depending on sort of what part of the world you look at, it can vary a little bit. For example, in the developing world, or excuse me, in the developed world, like the United States or Western Europe, these countries have put billions and billions of dollars into their weather infrastructure. And so the private sector has always been mostly kind of a value added point in the supply chain where we're maybe tweaking a specific type of model or providing software that we run the government forecast through. And then there's meteorologists as a service to sort of help you interpret that. In the developing world, it's been kind of a broken system where it's a heavy emphasis on physical infrastructure. Lots of development money is put towards ground weather stations that are really difficult to maintain. They're costly to maintain. And there's kind of this cycle where every 5 to 10 years, all of that has to be replaced again. And those countries really lack like the capabilities to kind of maintain them on their own. They're not sustainable economically. So there's lots of different challenges that exist today.
That's interesting. What would you say are like the major weather issues that cause these difficulties for government agencies or communities?
Yeah, well, now things are getting crazier and crazier every year, right? With climate change, weather is becoming more volatile all the time. We're seeing record fire years, record floods all the time. Hurricane seasons are becoming worse. And really, it's all of those challenges, right? It's the ability to understand what's going to happen, how bad is it going to be, and where. And all of those kind of nuances drive really big decisions, right? Whether that's protecting lives and property, or more on the economic side, thinking about business operations and efficiencies that can be gained from, do I operate today or not, or what can I do today to sort of get around the fact that this weather is impacting my business.
Yeah, and I know that, and at least in the United States, we like broke the record for the number of billion-dollar weather events this year. So I can only
Yeah.
imagine how those are impacting the rest of the world right now, especially when they don't have the proper weather forecasting stuff in place, right?
Yeah, it's not just weather forecasting stuff, right? I mean, it's their infrastructure itself,
Mhm.
right? Their roads, their storm water management systems are not as robust, and
Mhm.
so they're disproportionately affected by this bad weather. It's not even that they don't know it's going to happen, but the flooding is just worse, right?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. How can the public sector benefit from collaborating with private tech companies like Tomorrow or any other tool that could support what they're trying to put in place?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of ways. First and foremost, the private sector brings private investment, right?
Mhm.
We bring capital from whether that's venture capital or whatever the source might be. And that allows us to really move fast and take bigger risks because we're more nimble. We don't have all of the constraints of a government entity. And because we can have sort of dual use for what we're building, meaning the commercial sector is paying for the products and services that we're building, but then the government can also leverage that. It reduces their cost, right? Their return on investment to their taxpayers, their citizens is lower, or excuse me, it's higher because what they have to spend to get that same level of service is much lower because we're collaborating together.
That's awesome. Can you tell me about what Tomorrow is doing to help like US and international agencies? Like what are we doing to address those key weather issues?
Well, our role, I mean, our company strategy is really to innovate across that entire value chain that I talked about earlier, which
Mhm.
is observations, models, and products, right? So we're building our satellite program to really address kind of global observational gaps, particularly in the developing world over the oceans, but even parts of the United States where we really don't have the adequate coverage of things like ground-based radar systems in mountains or coastal regions. Our satellite constellation will really help in all of those areas. On the modeling side, we're really on the leading edge of using things like AI and machine learning to improve our models. But that also enables us, because we run our systems in the cloud, to really optimize them and keep the costs down, which is obviously attractive for us as a for profit company. And then in the product itself, it's not just giving a user kind of this same forecast that we've all been looking at for a century or more, which is here's the probability of a weather event occurring, now figure out what to do with that. We translate it into insights, right? Which means based on certain thresholds that you might care about, what are the decisions that you need to make? So really translating it into that decision. More specifically, we work with NOAA, for example, here in the US on the EPIC program. So that's really working to modernize their numerical weather prediction, their forecast system, migrating it into the cloud, allowing it to be more open source with more scientific collaboration and things like that. So we're the chief architect on that program, which is pretty cool. Another example is in Africa. In Africa, they have pretty poor infrastructure, right? And they really lack a lot of the meteorological capabilities that we have in the West. And we've, through our Tomorrow Now partnership, which is our nonprofit, have done a really awesome reanalysis of Africa, which is much higher resolution than anything that was ever available before. So that's enabling everything from giving insights to farmers, to climate resistant seed breeding programs, and all kinds of other really interesting things that are really helping the continent to think about what's our kind of climate sustainability strategy, how does weather play a role in that. So we're kind of doing lots of different things.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's a lot of collaboration going on. Are there any other examples of projects where collaborating with Tomorrow.io has allowed public agencies to serve their citizens or anything like that you could
Yeah,
share?
well, we work with a lot, whether that's kind of at the state and local level, all the way up to national agencies. And we've, just as a few examples, I can't necessarily name specific agencies, but we do a lot with flood warning. We have some hydrology modeling. And one of the things that we looked at after Hurricane Ida, which was a pretty severe hurricane a few years ago in the Northeast area, is that our models were actually warning of this flood risk several days ahead of 3 days actually of the flooding itself. Whereas the warnings from the National Weather Service that were issued in New York City, where people died, were only issued a few hours, if not sort of when the flooding was happening. So, working with agencies in that region to really improve their decision support services and their flood warning systems. We do a lot with winter operations, so a lot of local city and state planners who are thinking about snow removal or salting of roads. That has a huge cost implication. Should I deploy this group of trucks to this part of the city? And knowing exactly which streets to plow, our platform really helps them save quite a bit of money every year on sort of those operational decisions. Some other examples are we run something called a digital twin, which is essentially creating a sort of digital replica of an area and then putting in our weather information. A certain agency is looking at hardening their power grid, so thinking about how does extreme heat or winter weather or another variables sort of impact their ability to produce power and make sure they can keep everybody's lights on.
That is really cool. Wow. Looking forward a little bit, what innovations are you like most excited about that could further enhance these collaborations and like enhance providing decision advanced decision support for these weather events and just the infrastructure in general?
Yeah, I think it's two things for me. First is really the space program. What we're building in space is really revolutionary. So we've got two different types of satellites, radars. Those radars are built to see precipitation. They're the first ever commercially built weather radars in space. We've got two of them so far, and we're launching about a dozen more. And then we have something called a microwave sounder, which is another type of instrument, but it's really powerful for seeing things like temperature and humidity in the atmosphere. Both of them are really important for initializing models. And when you want to run a higher resolution, more accurate model, you need more inputs, right? Otherwise, you just have garbage in and garbage out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so our satellite constellation is going to improve this global revisit rate. So how frequently we're seeing different parts of the world dramatically. And that's going to change not just our ability to forecast the weather, but also, frankly, over time, climate data and lots of other sort of really important insights from the data that we'll be able to generate. And then the other, I think, really key piece, and this is maybe kind of our philosophy as a company, right, is how do we translate the weather information into something that people like you and me who are not meteorologists can do something with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is unique. Most other companies are just repackaging kind of weather information, weather forecasts, and then you have a meteorologist there to interpret it for you. So I think those are the kind of key pieces.
That's yeah. So we're bringing that data essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly. And translating it into something that's useful, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's related to whatever desired outcome they want. Like
Yeah,
that's the
exactly.
cool part to me. So from your point of view, like based on what you've seen so far, how can how can making commercial weather data more accessible help agencies with better decision making to protect those communities?
Yeah, well, first, I think different agencies, just like we see in the commercial sector, different businesses have different needs, right? An airline company cares about aspects of the weather that are different than a trucking company or a company that's resurfacing a road or a sports team that's making sort of stadium operations decisions, right? Those are all very different use cases, and the things they care about are unique. And that's the same with government agencies, right? Whether you're the Forestry Service looking at wildfires, or you're thinking about when certain pests or insects are going to hatch. Those are completely different models and outputs and decisions that need to be made. So I think it's really important that these agencies can seek out sort of tools that are unique to their use cases, right? And NOAA and the National Weather Service are enormous. Their budget is several $billion a year, but they still can't create tools and products that are unique to every single use case, right? But the private sector, because we can leverage that kind of commercial market that I talked about, can, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can build where there's a market, where there's an economic opportunity, we can build these tools. So I think really it's opening their ability to acquire these tools and allowing them to say, here's the problem I need to solve, and then let the private sector sort of innovate and solve it rather than being kind of overly prescriptive with build me this specific thing, right?
Yeah. Okay. What do you think needs to happen to enable governments or other organizations, agencies to take advantage of these innovations in this private sector? Like, is this something we could ultimately support them doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we already are, but
Mhm.
they really, what they need, in building on my last comment, is first, it's allowing them the freedom to access these tools, right? To buy commercial solutions. We see in the US, in the Department of Defense, for example, this trend towards kind of a buy first mentality, right? Let's not build it. Let's not spend billions of dollars of taxpayer money rebuilding something that already exists in the commercial sector when we could just use that, right? It makes sense. It's a huge cost savings to the taxpayer, and these agencies often don't know what's out there, right? They're not really having the conversations with the commercial sector to say, what innovations are you building? Here are the problems that I have. What are the things that you're building? How can we match those together? So it's really kind of giving them more freedom. And of course, budgets and sort of authorities come along with that are really key.
Yeah. So beyond helping them build out better forecasting and like create the infrastructure needed to tie everything together, how can tech partnerships strengthen an organization or the government's ability to communicate weather risks to the public?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a challenging one because I think the commercial sector doesn't necessarily want to get into the business of providing the life saving alert.
Mhm.
That's the government's role, right? And that's not necessarily something that we want to do directly, but we can support it, right? With better information, with better tools that allow better communication. Getting to a great example is extreme heat, right? Extreme heat is it kills people, right? Especially in sort of urban centers where you have these heat domes around the concrete
Mhm.
retains the heat in urban areas. Um, and temperature is actually one of the easiest weather variables to forecast. People die, right? Even though we have this scientific ability to model the heat quite well, because we're not getting them the information in a way that really drives the right decisions, right? Which could be something simple like open your windows or close your curtains or whatever it might be, right? Turn on your AC, things like that.
Mhm.
And so the private sector can really be there to support like building better tools, better communication tools, filling gaps with observations, obviously, and also improving the models across the board.
Okay. I think I have one more question for you. So it's kind of like building out or helping them support their early warning systems, essentially, right?
Yeah, I mean, really, it can be across the whole value chain, obviously, but I think that's really a key piece of it is improving early warning. There are multiple disciplines here, right? Us as a software company, we can help with the tools themselves, but there might be more kind of social sciences companies that understand how to deliver that information in a way that drives the right decision, right?
Yeah. Okay.
There's lots of different ways to look at it.
All right. What advice would you give to any public or private organization that is looking to work together to drive impact for weather related issues? As someone who is tackling this issue, what could you tell them?
Yeah, I think the most important piece is really having more open dialogue, whether that's domestically or internationally between the public sector and the private sector, where the public sector can say, here are the problems that we have, and the private sector can say, here are the solutions, rather than what happens for the most part now, where the public sector says, this is the solution that I want. And oftentimes they don't have the full picture. They only know kind of the context from which they're kind of operating, and they might be kind of overly prescriptive and not realize that the private sector is building something that's better, cheaper, faster, and able to solve not just that problem but multiple other problems, right?
Yeah.
And so really kind of allowing us to be more collaborative, I think is really key.
Awesome. Well, those are all the questions I have for you today, Thomas. Thank you so much for educating me on this issue and what we're doing to help organizations combat it.